Let's talk about cost allocations, specifically joint products and byproducts. First, some terminology. Joint costs are costs of a single production process that result in multiple products at the same time. The split-off point is that place in a joint production process where two or more products become separately identifiable. Inseparable costs are costs incurred beyond the split-off point that can be assigned to each of the specific or specific, to the separately identifiable specific products. We can categorize joint process outputs as outputs with positive sales value and outputs with no sales value. Product is any output with a positive sales value or an output that enables a firm to avoid incurring costs. So the value could be high or relatively low. The main product is the output of a joint production process that yields one product with a high sales value relative to sales value of other outputs. And joint products that have outputs of a joint production process that yield two or more products with a high sales value compared to the sales value of any other outputs are referred to as joint products. Byproducts are outputs of a joint production process that have low sales value compared to the sales value of the other products. Let's take a look at a joint process flowchart. Here we have a plant that produces steam. Now the steam has zero sales value, and it also produces products, joint products 1 and 2. And we also see that we're involved with byproducts. All right, let's go over some reasons for allocating joint costs. First, it's required for GAAP and taxation purposes that we have cost to all our products. Now, cost values may be used for evaluation purposes as well. So, in other words, we want to know cost values for internal management decision making. And if we're involved with cost-based contracting, such as with the U.S. government, we will need to allocate cost to various joint products. Joint costs are also allocated as a result of insurance settlements, and they are required by regulators, and also they may occur in the event of litigation. Let's go over some joint cost allocation methods. One is called physical measures, and it's the idea that you allocate using tangible attributes of the product, such as pounds, gallons, and barrels. And this is the one I'm most familiar with. If we start off with a bar of steel, we may cut it. Once we cut it, we can still use that steel in a variety of products. There is also a market-based allocation, where we allocate a cost to joint products based on either the sales value at the split-off, net realizable value, or a constant gross margin percentage, which is also a form of net realizable value. Let's talk about the physical measures method. Here we allocate joint costs to various products flowing from that manufacturing process on the basis of size, and size can be in the form of weight, volume, or other physical measure at the split-off point of the total production of the products. So an example could be we make a batch of something in gallons. Well, then that base gallons goes to various products that are made from that liquid based on, say, the gallons would be the measure. Okay, so that's a very common way to allocate joint cost. We have the cost of all of that batch of whatever that chemical mix is, but then we divide it to our products based on some physical measurement method. And in many cases, we'll track those physical measurements within the bill of materials, which is the listing of all the material components that go into every finished product we make. And we break it down by every sub-assembly, or perhaps part that goes into the final product. Okay, so here's an example. We have two products arising out of one joint process, and it cost $500 at the joint process. Assume that we can make 1 gallon of cream or 1 gallon of skim milk, or we're assuming the two are equal. Okay, so if we use 25 gallons of cream and 75 gallons of skim milk, we can allocate the cost 25% to cream and 75% to skim milk. And assuming that 1 gallon of cream is equal to 1 gallon of skim milk, at the point at which we're going to separate the gallons into cream and skim milk, then allocating that cost $125 to cream and $375 to skim milk, as you see in the diagram there, would be a fair and equitable method of allocating joint process cost using physical measurements. Now let's take a look at the sales value at the split-off method. Here we use the sales value of the entire production of the accounting period to calculate the allocation percentage. We ignore inventories. So let's see an example here. Now what we say is the final sales value of production of cream and skim milk is $1,300, assuming we're going to have 25 gallons of cream and 75 gallons of skim milk. Okay, so we come up with those various values for cream and skim milk, and the total is $2,100. Now that we know that's the sales value at the final sales value, we can allocate that based on 1,300 divided by 2,100 or 800 divided by 2,100 to allocate the joint costs based on the sales value at the split-off point, and we wind up with a different dollar amount of allocating those gallons. If we look at the net realizable value method, here we allocate joint costs to joint products on the basis of the relative NRV, or net realizable value of total production, of the joint products. So NRV is the final sales value less separable costs. Okay, let's see an example here. A little hard to read with that dark purple there, but here we have the same final sales value of $1,300 for cream and $800 for skim milk, and we calculate the NRV, and the weighting is 40 to 60%, right? But what's different? Before we get the NRV, we separated separable costs that we could identify to cream and skim milk. So there's this extra step that goes in that says, okay, we know the final sales value, but let's back off separable cost and then do the weighting in terms of allocating joint cost at the split-off point. And here too we get a different allocation result. Alright, there's also the constant gross margin NRV method, and this allocates joint costs to joint products in a way that the overall gross margin percentage is identical for the individual products. And then we calculate joint cost as a residual amount. So let's see an example here. Now, we still have cream being worth $1,300 and skim milk being worth $800 for a total final sales value of $2,100. If we back off the separable cost in total, we come up with NRV of $1,000. The joint costs are $500, and therefore gross profit is $500. So we're able to calculate a gross profit percentage based on sales value, and it's about 23.8%. So now what we do is we determine what the gross margin would be at 23.8% and back that off from the sales value so that all three products have the same 23.8% gross margin, and from there we would subtract out separable costs to come up with the joint cost allocated. So this one has a bit of a twist to it. Alright, so which method should you select? If you know the selling price at the split-off, the sales value at the split-off method makes a whole lot of sense. If it's not available, the NRV method makes more sense. If simplicity is the primary driver, the physical measures method or the constant gross margin method could be used. Now, despite knowing all of this, some firms don't even choose to allocate joint costs at all. Let's talk a little bit about selling or processing further decisions. Keep in mind that once we're at a point where we've processed something to a point where we've got to decide to sell or process further, joint costs are an irrelevant cost. They're a sunk cost. They've already been produced, and now we're concerned with a prospective decision on whether we should sell the goods immediately or process it further and sell whatever we produce from that. Okay? Joint costs are sunk. The separable costs need to be evaluated to determine the relevance. So here what we're concerned with is what's the incremental costs of selling it, what's the incremental cost of processing it further, and what can we get for the value of incurring that incremental cost versus selling it immediately where we're going to have minimized incremental costs. Okay, so this is the way you approach it. We've got a single production process. We produce costs that can become a joint product number 1 or number 2. And we've got to determine in either of those, do we process them separately into final product 1 or final product 2. So that's essentially where we're at, and we're sitting at the joint product point to make our decision. Let's talk a little bit about byproducts. There's 2 methods to account for byproducts. The production method recognizes byproducts inventory as it is created, and then we record the sales and cost at the time of the sale. We could use the sales method where we recognize no byproduct inventory and we recognize only sales at the time of sales, and then there's no tracking of the byproduct costs as a separate inventory item or as a separate cost item. In other words, we're seeing lumping into the main product.